I said leave her alone. The diner froze, as a quiet single dad silenced two bullies. But when his Marine Corps past was exposed, the entire town realized they had just awakened a warrior. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Through the rain-streaked windshield of his old Ford pickup, Jack Turner watched the familiar storefronts of Main Street slide past in a wet blur. The rhythmic swish of windshield wipers matched the heavy drumming of rain on the truck's roof. His hands, still bearing traces of motor oil despite thorough washing, gripped the steering wheel firmly, a habit from his Marine days that he'd never quite shaken. In the passenger seat, Emily fidgeted with her seatbelt, her blue eyes bright despite the gloomy evening. Her dark hair was pulled back in a slightly messy ponytail, and she still wore the same determined expression she'd had while helping him organize tools at the shop after school. "Dad," Emily's voice broke through the comfortable silence. "I'm really hungry. Can we please stop at the diner? Pretty please?" Jack glanced at his daughter, noting the hopeful look on her face, the same look that always reminded him of her mother. His chest tightened for a moment, as it always did when memories of Sarah surfaced. "We have food at home, sweetheart," he replied automatically, though without much conviction. Truth was, after a long day of crawling under cars and dealing with difficult customers, he wasn't exactly eager to cook. "But Dad," Emily persisted, "we haven't been to the diner in forever, and you promised we'd try to do more fun things together, remember?" She paused, then added quietly, "Mom always liked their cherry pie." Jack's breath caught in his throat. Emily rarely mentioned her mother these days, and when she did, it was always in these simple, matter-of-fact ways that somehow hit harder than any dramatic declaration could. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof of the truck like tiny bullets. The sound transported Jack briefly back to different rains, different times. He pushed the memories away, focusing instead on the gleaming, wet asphalt ahead. "All right," he conceded, allowing a small smile to touch his lips. "Just this once." Emily's face lit up with victory. "Yes, thank you, Daddy." She bounced in her seat, her earlier fatigue apparently forgotten. "Can I get a milkshake?" "We'll see," Jack replied. But his daughter's enthusiasm was infectious, and he felt some of his own weariness lifting. He pulled the truck into an empty spot in front of Carson's Diner, its neon sign casting a warm glow through the rainy darkness. The sea flickered uncertainly, as it had for as long as he could remember. The diner itself was a fixture of small-town life, its chrome and red vinyl interior unchanged since the 1950s. "Wait there," Jack instructed, reaching behind his seat for the umbrella. He got out first, circled around to Emily's side, and opened her door with the umbrella ready. She hopped down, immediately grabbing his free hand. Another habit that made his heart ache a little, knowing someday she'd be too old for such gestures. Together they splashed through puddles to the diner's entrance. The bell above the door chimed as they stepped inside, bringing with them a gust of damp air and the fresh scent of rain. The warmth and familiar smell of coffee and grilled onions wrapped around them. Classic rock played softly from an ancient jukebox in the corner. About half the booths were occupied, usual for a Tuesday evening. Emily immediately shed her light jacket, hanging it on the coat rack with the precision of someone twice her age. "Can we sit by the window, Dad?" she asked, already moving toward her preferred spot. Jack followed, his military-trained eyes automatically scanning the room, another habit he'd never lost. Most faces were familiar. Old Mr. Peterson with his ever-present newspaper, the Henderson twins sharing a plate of fries, Mrs. McCarthy nursing her eternal cup of coffee. But his attention caught on something else. The young waitress, Maria, according to her name tag, moved between tables with grace, but there was tension in her shoulders. Jack noticed how she kept glancing nervously toward a corner booth where two men sat, their postures radiating hostility. They weren't locals, at least not any Jack recognized. Their clothes were clean but worn, the kind of outfit you'd wear for manual labor. One wore a cap pulled low over his eyes, while the other's face was flushed red, probably from more than just the cold weather. Emily slid into their chosen booth, immediately reaching for the menu she knew by heart anyway. Jack sat facing the room, yet another military habit, which gave him a clear view of both Maria and the two men. Something in their body language set off warning signals in his mind, the same instincts that had kept him and his unit alive in far more dangerous situations. "Dad? Dad, are you listening?" Emily's voice pulled him back to the present. I said I know what I want to order. Already? Jack forced himself to focus on his daughter, though he remained acutely aware of the tension building in the diner's atmosphere. Let me guess. Chocolate chip pancakes? Emily giggled. No, silly. That's for breakfast. I want a cheeseburger. And maybe, she drew out the word hopefully, a strawberry milkshake? Before Jack could respond, he caught movement in his peripheral vision. Maria was approaching their table, notepad in hand. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, probably in her mid-20s. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, and despite her obvious unease, she managed a genuine smile for Emily. Welcome to Carson's, she said, her voice warm but carrying a slight tremor. Can I get you started with some drinks? From the corner booth, one of the men's voices carried clearly across the diner. Hey, sweetheart, we're still waiting on our refills over here. The words themselves weren't necessarily hostile, but the tone made Jack's jaw tighten. He watched as Maria's smile faltered slightly, though she maintained her professional demeanor. Emily, oblivious to the underlying tension, launched into her order with enthusiasm. Could I please have a strawberry milkshake? Dad said maybe, but it's Tuesday, and Tuesday is basically the middle of the week, so it's kind of special, right? Maria's smile became more genuine as she looked at Emily. Tuesday is definitely special, she agreed, then glanced at Jack for confirmation. He nodded, his attention still divided between the immediate interaction and the growing discomfort in the diner's atmosphere. The men in the corner were watching Maria with undisguised disdain, their postures becoming more aggressive with each passing moment. One strawberry milkshake, Maria wrote down, her pen trembling slightly. And for you, sir? Just coffee black, Jack replied, his voice low and steady. He could feel the situation approaching a tipping point, like the calm before a storm he'd experienced too many times in combat. The bell above the door chimed again, and a gust of cold air swept through the diner. The sound of rain grew louder for a moment, then faded as the door swung shut. But the tension in the room only continued to build. Through the rain-streaked windshield of his old Ford pickup, Jack Turner watched the familiar storefronts of Main Street slide past in a wet blur. The rhythmic swish of windshield wipers matched the heavy drumming of rain on the truck's roof. His hands, still bearing traces of motor oil despite thorough washing, gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as his 10-year-old daughter Emily bounced in the passenger seat. Please, Daddy? Pretty please? Emily's blue eyes sparkled with hope as she pointed at Rose's diner, its neon sign casting a warm glow through the rain. We haven't had their chocolate milkshakes in forever. Jack glanced at his daughter, noting how her long brown hair was coming loose from its ponytail after a long day at his shop. She'd spent the afternoon doing homework at his desk, occasionally helping him hand tools when he worked on Mrs. Peterson's temperamental Volvo. The sight of her eager face made his resistance crumble. All right, sweetheart, he said, already signaling to turn into the diner's parking lot. But just this once. It's not good for us to eat out too often. Emily's delighted squeal brought a rare smile to his face. They parked close to the entrance, and Jack helped Emily dodge the biggest puddles as they hurried through the rain to the diner's door. The bell chimed cheerfully as they entered, bringing with it the comforting smells of coffee and grilled burgers. The diner was about half full, with the usual mix of locals seeking shelter from the rain. Red vinyl booths lined the windows, while chrome-edged tables dotted the center of the room. Behind the counter, the young waitress, Maria, Jack remembered, moved efficiently between the coffee maker and the service window. Hi, Mr. Turner. Hi, Emily. Maria's warm smile lit up her face as she noticed them. She grabbed 2 menus and started toward them, but a gruff voice from the corner booth made her pause. Hey, sweetheart, where's our food? We've been waiting forever. One of 2 men slouched in the corner booth called out. His companion snickered, both of them watching Maria with unfriendly eyes. Just a few more minutes, sir, Maria replied politely, her accent slightly more pronounced under stress. The kitchen is working on your order right now. Jack guided Emily to a booth, keeping one eye on the situation. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across the men's faces as they exchanged knowing looks that made Jack's jaw tighten. Maybe if you spoke proper English, they'd understand our order better, the second man said loudly enough for everyone to hear. A few other diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly very interested in their coffee cups or phones. Maria's shoulders tensed, but she maintained her professional smile as she approached Jack's table. Welcome to Rose's. Can I start you with some drinks? Before she could finish, the first man's voice cut through the diner again.
Hey, we're not done talking to you.
His words slurred slightly, suggesting they'd had a few drinks before coming to the diner. Emily looked up at Maria with concern. Are those men being mean to you? It's okay, sweetie, Maria assured her, but her hand trembled slightly as she held her order pad. The men pushed themselves up from their booth, and the larger one stalked over to where Maria stood. The diner grew quieter, the clink of silverware falling silent as other customers pretended not to notice what was happening. When I'm talking to you, you listen, the man growled, grabbing Maria's arm roughly. She winced, trying to pull away without making a scene. Jack's chair scraped against the linoleum floor as he stood up, his full height becoming apparent as he drew himself to his full 6 feet. Years of military discipline showed in his posture, and his voice carried the unmistakable tone of command as it cut through the tense silence. I said, "Leave her alone." The words echoed off the diner's walls. Every head turned toward Jack, whose steady gaze was fixed on the man gripping Maria's arm. The fluorescent lights caught the silver at Jack's temples, and something in his bearing made the bigger man hesitate. "This ain't your business, pal," the second man started to say, but his voice wavered as Jack took one step forward. "You're going to let go of her arm?" Jack continued, his voice level but carrying an edge that brooked no argument. "Then you're going to sit down, pay your bill, and leave." Without another word, the larger man's grip loosened, and Maria quickly stepped back, rubbing her arm. The two men looked at each other, then at Jack, whose unwavering stare held them in place. The moment stretched, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. Finally, the bigger man dropped his gaze. "Whatever," he muttered, reaching for his wallet and throwing some crumpled bills on their table. His companion followed suit, and they shuffled toward the exit, careful to give Jack a wide berth. The bell chimed again as they left, and the diner slowly came back to life. Conversations resumed. Though many eyes still darted between Jack and Maria, Jack sat back down beside Emily, who was beaming at him with pride. "That was awesome, Daddy," she whispered, though in the way of excited children, her whisper carried across several tables. Maria stood by their table, her dark eyes meeting Jack's with quiet gratitude. No words were needed as she smoothed her apron with slightly trembling hands. The moment passed between them, heavy with unspoken understanding, before she found her voice again. "Thank you," she said softly, then managed a warm smile for Emily. "Now, how about that chocolate milkshake?" The diner settled into an uneasy quiet after the two men skulked out into the rain. The clink of silverware gradually resumed, along with hushed conversations that drifted between the worn leather booths. Jack Turner kept his eyes on the laminated menu, trying to ignore the sideways glances from other customers. Emily swung her legs under the table, completely unfazed by what had just happened. "Can I get chocolate chip pancakes, Daddy, even though it's dinner time?" "Sure, sweetheart." Jack's voice was soft, a stark contrast to the commanding tone he'd used moments before. He could feel people watching him, their whispers growing more distinct. "That's Jack Turner, isn't it?" An older man at the counter spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The mechanic from Turner's Auto on Cedar Street?" Another customer chimed in. "Didn't he serve in the Marines? I heard he was an officer." Jack's shoulders tensed. He hadn't wanted attention. He just wanted those men to leave the waitress alone. The familiar weight of memories pressed down on him. The desert heat, the sound of helicopters, faces of men he'd led and lost. Maria approached their table, her hands only slightly shaking as she held her notepad. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back, and her name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did. Can I take your order?" Before Jack could respond, Emily burst with enthusiasm.
My dad was a hero. He was in charge of lots of soldiers, and they gave him medals and everything.
She beamed with pride, while Jack shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Emily." His tone carried a gentle warning, but his daughter wasn't finished. "It's true. He has a special box in his closet with all his medals, but he never shows them to anyone." Emily turned to Maria. "He doesn't like to talk about it, but he always helps people who need it. That's what heroes do, right?" Maria's warm brown eyes met Jack's for a moment. "Your daughter is very proud of you, Mr. Turner." Jack cleared his throat. "Just Jack is fine, and we'll have the chocolate chip pancakes for the little chatterbox here." He ruffled Emily's hair affectionately. "I'll take the burger and fries, please." As Maria wrote down their order, more whispers circulated through the diner. Jack caught fragments of conversations. Marine Corps officer. Living here quietly all this time. Runs that repair shop by himself. The attention made his skin crawl. He'd spent years building a quiet life here with Emily after Sarah's death, focusing on his daughter and his work. The last thing he wanted was to be the center of attention. Emily pulled a slightly crumpled drawing from her backpack. "Look what I made in art class today, Daddy. It's our house, and there's you fixing cars, and there's me in the tree swing you built." Jack welcomed the distraction, studying the colorful crayon creation. "That's beautiful, honey. We'll put it right on the fridge when we get home." Other customers continued to steal glances at their table, but Jack kept his focus on Emily. She chatted about her day at school, her words tumbling out in excited rushes between bites of pancakes when their food arrived. Maria kept their drinks filled, moving efficiently between tables but always with a gentle smile for Emily. The rain drummed steadily against the windows, creating a cozy atmosphere inside the diner. The overhead lights reflected off the chrome trim and red vinyl seats, and the smell of coffee and grilled onions filled the air. It was the kind of place Jack usually avoided. Too many people, too many opportunities for conversation he didn't want to have. But watching Emily happily drown her pancakes in syrup, he had to admit it felt nice to be out of their usual routine. As the meal wound down, Maria brought their check. Her hands were steady now, her voice stronger. "I want to thank you again," she said, placing the bill on the table. "What you did. Not everyone would have spoken up." Jack shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Maria said softly. "They wouldn't. They didn't." Before Jack could brush off her gratitude again, Emily spoke up. "You're the nicest waitress we've ever had." She gave Maria her brightest smile. "Your voice is pretty, and you kept my hot chocolate super full, and you didn't even get mad when I spilled a little bit." A blush colored Maria's cheeks at the child's earnest praise. "Thank you, Emily. That's very sweet of you to say." The simple sincerity in Emily's words seemed to touch something in Maria. She blinked rapidly, her smile wobbling just slightly at the edges. For a moment, the three of them existed in a bubble of warmth, separated from the curious stares and whispers of the other diners. Jack recognized the look in Maria's eyes, the same gratitude he'd seen in civilians' faces overseas, the relief of someone who'd found an unexpected ally in a difficult moment. He knew that look should make him feel good, like he'd done something right. Instead, it brought back memories of times he hadn't been able to help, faces of people he couldn't save. Emily gathered up her crayons and drawing, completely unaware of the complex emotions swirling around the adults. "Can we come back tomorrow? They have apple pie in that spinny case up front, and it looks really good." "We'll see," Jack said, pulling out his wallet. He left a generous tip along with the payment, avoiding Maria's eyes. He didn't need her gratitude. He didn't need anyone's attention or praise. He just needed to get back to his quiet life with Emily, where the past stayed firmly in the past. But as he helped Emily slide out of the booth, he couldn't completely ignore the way the diner felt warmer somehow, more welcoming than when they'd first walked in. Maybe it was just the contrast with the gloomy weather outside, or maybe it was the lingering sweetness of chocolate chip pancakes and his daughter's laughter. Maria stood by their table, holding the empty plates. The overhead lights caught the silver cross she wore on a delicate chain around her neck. "Have a good evening," she said, "and thank you both for coming in." The chocolate chip pancakes disappeared quickly from Emily's plate, leaving behind sticky trails of syrup and a sprinkling of crumbs. Jack finished the last bite of his burger, watching his daughter scrape her fork across the ceramic surface to catch every last morsel. "That was the best dinner ever," Emily declared, her face glowing with satisfaction. She twisted in her booth seat to look for Maria, who was refilling coffee cups at a nearby table. Jack recognized the look in his daughter's eyes, the same determined expression she wore when she'd made up her mind about something. "Emily," he warned gently, knowing what was coming. "Maria!" Emily called out, waving enthusiastically. "Will you sit with us for a minute, please?" Maria glanced their way. Then at the nearly empty diner. Only a few regulars remained, nursing their coffee cups. She hesitated, clutching her coffee pot close. "Please?" Emily repeated, adding an extra dose of sweetness to her voice. "Just for a tiny bit?" Jack found himself speaking up, surprising himself. We'd appreciate the company, if you have time." The words came out gruff but sincere. Maria's shoulders relaxed slightly. She returned the coffee pot to its warmer and made her way to their booth. "Just for a few minutes," she said softly, sliding in next to Emily, who immediately scooted closer. "Where are you from?" Emily asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Your accent is pretty." A faint blush colored Maria's cheeks. "I moved here from Arizona 3 months ago," she replied, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "But my family is originally from Mexico." "Why did you come here?" Emily leaned forward, genuinely interested. Jack noticed how his daughter's openness seemed to put Maria more at ease. "I needed a fresh start," Maria explained, her voice carrying a hint of something deeper. Perhaps sadness, perhaps hope. "And the rent is cheaper here than in the city. I send money home to my mother every month to help with my younger sister's school expenses." Jack observed the way Maria's eyes softened when she mentioned her family. He recognized the look of someone carrying responsibilities far heavier than their years should require. "That must be hard," Emily said, her face scrunching with concern. "Being away from your mom and sisters?" Maria nodded, twisting the simple silver ring on her right hand. "It is hard. But we talk on the phone every Sunday, and my mother always says that working hard for your family is a blessing, not a burden." "Your mother sounds wise," Jack commented quietly. It was the first thing he'd said since Maria sat down. "She is," Maria agreed, meeting his eyes briefly before looking down at her hands again. "She raised 4 daughters by herself after my father passed away. She taught us that strength comes from how you treat others, not from how others treat you." Emily reached over and placed her small hand over Maria's. "That's kind of like what Daddy says. He says being brave isn't about being tough. It's about doing the right thing even when it's scary." Jack shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the parallel but touched by his daughter's words. The military had taught him about bravery, but Emily had taught him about courage of a different kind. The courage to keep living, to keep loving, after loss. "Your father is a very brave man," Maria said softly, glancing at Jack with genuine respect. "What happened earlier? Most people just look away." "Daddy was a Marine," Emily announced proudly. "He protected lots of people." Jack cleared his throat. "That was a long time ago, Em. But you still protect people," Emily insisted. "Like today." Maria smiled at Emily's enthusiasm. "Your daughter has a beautiful heart, Mr. Turner." "Jack," he corrected automatically. "And yes, she does. Gets it from her mother." A moment of silence settled over the booth. Emily looked between the 2 adults, then declared, "We should come here for dinner more often. The pancakes are amazing, and Maria is the nicest waitress ever." "You're very sweet," Maria said, carefully standing up from the booth. "But I should get back to work. Thank you for letting me sit with you." Emily scrambled out after her. "Wait, can I give you a hug?" Maria paused, clearly touched by the request. She knelt down to Emily's level, and the little girl threw her arms around her neck. "I hope we see you again soon," Emily exclaimed, squeezing tight. Jack watched the scene unfold, his heart a tangle of emotions. Part of him warmed at his daughter's natural ability to connect with others, to offer kindness so freely. But another part, the part that still woke up reaching for his wife's empty side of the bed, felt a familiar fear creeping in. Opening their hearts meant risking pain. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Yet as he observed Maria's gentle interaction with Emily, he couldn't deny the genuine warmth in her eyes, or the way his daughter practically glowed in her presence. It had been so long since Emily had bonded with someone this way, especially another woman. Jack stood up, pulling out his wallet to leave a tip. He kept his movements measured, practiced, the same control he'd learned in the Corps. But watching Emily's happiness made him wonder if sometimes control came at too high a price. The amount he left on the table was more generous than usual, not out of pity, but respect. For Maria's dignity in the face of harassment, for her quiet strength in supporting her family, for her kindness toward his daughter. "Thank you for everything," he said, meeting Maria's eyes directly for the first time since she'd sat down. He meant more than just the meal, and from her slight nod she understood. Emily was still beaming as they gathered their things to leave, her small hand slipping into Jack's larger one. The rain had stopped outside, leaving puddles that reflected the diner's neon signs in wobbling patterns of red and blue. The porch light cast long shadows across Jack's front yard as he guided Emily up the worn wooden steps of their modest 2-story home. The evening air had grown cooler after the rain, and crickets chirped their nightly chorus from the nearby bushes. Time for bed, kiddo, Jack said, unlocking the front door. It's already past your bedtime. Emily yawned but still managed to smile. Can we go back to the diner tomorrow? Maria makes the best chocolate chip pancakes. Jack helped her out of her light jacket, hanging it on the coat rack beside the door. We'll see. Now go brush your teeth. While Emily got ready for bed, Jack moved through their familiar nighttime routine. He checked the locks, adjusted the thermostat, and made sure Emily's backpack was ready for school tomorrow. These simple tasks anchored him, giving structure to the quiet evenings that sometimes felt too empty. In Emily's room, stuffed animals lined the shelf above her bed, and a small nightlight cast a gentle glow across her collection of horse figurines. Jack sat on the edge of her bed as she snuggled under her favorite purple comforter. "Dad?" Emily's voice was soft, already heavy with sleep. "I think Maria needs friends. She looks sad sometimes, like you do when you think I'm not watching." Jack's chest tightened. Even at 10, Emily noticed far more than he gave her credit for. He smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Everyone gets sad sometimes, sweetheart. That's just part of life. But we could help her not be sad," Emily insisted, fighting another yawn. "Like how you helped her tonight." Jack leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Sleep tight, Emmy. I love you. Love you too, Dad." He waited until her breathing evened out before quietly closing her door. Instead of heading to bed himself, Jack made his way to the detached garage that served as both his home workshop and personal retreat. The familiar scents of motor oil and metal greeted him as he flicked on the fluorescent lights. In the corner, on a high shelf away from curious eyes, sat a triangular wooden case. Jack pulled it down, his calloused fingers tracing the edges before opening it to reveal the carefully folded Marine Corps flag inside. The rich red and deep blue fabric held memories he usually kept locked away, but tonight they rushed forward like a flood. The hot Afghanistan sun beating down on his unit, the weight of responsibility for his men, the explosion that took Jenkins and Martinez, the letters he had to write to their families. Jack's hands began to shake slightly. He gripped the edge of his workbench, forcing himself to take slow, deep breaths like his therapist had taught him. The flag represented honor, sacrifice, and duty, but it also carried the weight of decisions that still haunted his dreams. Sudden laughter drifted through the garage's small window, startling Jack from his memories. Next door, the Hendersons were having one of their regular evening gatherings on their back porch. The sound of normal, peaceful life felt jarring against the battlefield images, still fresh in his mind. Jack carefully returned the flag to its case and placed it back on the shelf. He was about to turn off the lights when his cell phone buzzed in his pocket. The caller ID showed a familiar name, Tom Reynolds. "Tom," Jack answered, checking his watch. It was unusual for his former Marine buddy to call this late. "Heard you made some noise tonight." Tom's gravelly voice carried a note of concern beneath its usual gruffness. Jack moved to the garage window, looking out at the darkened street. "News travels fast in this town. Small towns, brother. My cousin works at that hardware store across from the diner. Said you put some jackasses in their place. I just told them to leave the waitress alone. It wasn't a big deal. Maybe not to you," Tom replied. "But careful, Jack. Some folks don't like being told the truth." Jack stood at the window, suddenly uneasy as he scanned the quiet neighborhood. The streetlights cast pools of yellow light on empty sidewalks, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The peaceful scene felt deceptively fragile. The morning sun peeked through scattered clouds as Jack's old pickup truck rumbled down Pine Street. Emily sat beside him, humming along to a pop song on the radio while reviewing her math homework one last time. "Did you double-check your answers?" Jack asked, glancing at the worksheet in her lap. "3 times, Dad," Emily said with an exaggerated sigh. "Just like you taught me." Jack smiled, remembering how his late wife Sarah had always teased him about his attention to detail. "That's my girl." The truck slowed as they approached Riverside Elementary. Other parents were already lined up, dropping off their children for the day. Emily gathered her backpack and lunchbox, then paused. "Dad?" she asked, her voice suddenly serious. "Can we go back to the diner tonight? I want to see Maria again." Jack's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "We'll see, sweetie. I've got a lot of work today." "Please?" Emily's eyes grew wide. "She seemed kind of sad last night. Maybe we could cheer her up?" The truck rolled to a stop in front of the school. Jack turned to his daughter, struck by her genuine concern for others. Another trait she'd inherited from Sarah. "Tell you what," he said. "Let me get through today's jobs first, and we'll talk about it after school." Emily's face brightened. She leaned over and hugged him quickly. "Thanks, Dad. Love you." "Love you too, kiddo. Have a good day." Jack watched as Emily joined the stream of students flowing through the school's front doors. He waited until she disappeared inside, before pulling away from the curb, his mind already shifting to the day's work ahead. The morning traffic was light as he drove to Turner's Auto Repair, his shop just off Main Street. The familiar sight of the weathered brick building usually brought him comfort. This was his territory, where he knew exactly what to do and how to fix things. But today, something felt off. As he turned into the parking lot, the rising sun hit the metal garage doors at an angle that made the fresh graffiti impossible to miss. Jack's stomach clenched as he read the crude message sprayed across his property in angry red letters. "Go back where you came from." He cut the engine and sat there, staring at the hateful words. The paint was still fresh enough that tiny droplets had run down the door's corrugated surface. This had happened recently, probably just hours ago. The message wasn't meant for him, and they all knew it. This was about Maria. Jack got out of his truck, gravel crunching under his boots as he walked closer to inspect the damage. His jaw tightened as he touched the paint, coming away with red on his fingertips. In the Marine Corps, he'd learned to read situations quickly, to spot threats and anticipate where trouble might come from. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a warning. Mrs. Chen from the neighboring flower shop hurried over, her face creased with concern. "Jack, I just arrived and saw this. Should we call the police?" He shook his head slowly. "They won't do anything. No witnesses. No cameras." He wiped the paint from his fingers with a shop rag from his pocket. "But I'd appreciate it if you could keep an eye out. Let me know if you see anything suspicious." "Of course." She nodded. "This isn't right, Jack. First the incident at the diner, now this." "No," he agreed quietly. "It's not right at all." After Mrs. Chen returned to her shop, Jack went inside to get cleaning supplies. The familiar smells of oil, rubber, and metal usually helped center him, but today they couldn't calm the growing anger in his chest. As he gathered what he needed to remove the graffiti, memories from his service years surfaced unbidden. He remembered the villages in Afghanistan where he'd seen similar hatred painted on walls. He remembered the faces of people targeted simply for who they were or who they helped. He remembered promising himself that he'd never stand by and watch it happen again. But he'd also promised Sarah, in those final days at the hospital, that he'd keep Emily safe, that he'd give her a peaceful life, away from conflict and danger. He'd chosen this quiet town specifically for that reason. Jack began scrubbing at the paint, his movements mechanical and precise. The red letters slowly gave way to the original gray of the garage door, but he knew the real stain wouldn't be so easily erased. Someone had crossed a line, marking his property as a warning to others. They'd brought the fight to his doorstep, trying to intimidate not just Maria, but anyone who might stand with her. The sound of an approaching vehicle made him turn. It was Bill Henderson, one of his regular customers, pulling up in his SUV. "Morning, Jack," Bill called out, then noticed what Jack was doing. "Damn! Heard about what happened at the diner last night. Guess some folks didn't like being called out." Jack continued scrubbing. "Guess not. Look," Bill said, lowering his voice. "Maybe it's best to just let things settle down. You know how some people are around here. They don't like change." Jack straightened up, fixing Bill with a steady gaze that made the other man step back slightly. "And what exactly needs to settle down, Bill? The fact that someone's being harassed for doing their job? Or that somebody decided to vandalize my property because I spoke up about it?" Bill raised his hands defensively. "I'm just saying, you've got Emily to think about. You've built a good life here. Why risk stirring things up?" The shop rag in Jack's hand was now stained completely red. He looked at it, then at the partially cleaned garage door, and finally back at Bill. His fists clenched involuntarily, and he felt the familiar tension in his shoulders, the same tension he'd felt in combat when decisions had to be made. He knew Bill was right about one thing. He did have Emily to think about. But what kind of example would he be setting for his daughter if he backed down now? What would it teach her about standing up for what's right? The memory of Maria's grateful look in the diner flashed through his mind, followed by Emily's innocent question about seeing her again. Then he thought about Sarah. and what she would say if she were here. She'd always believed in doing what was right, even when it was hard. Jack realized he couldn't walk away from this, even if he wanted to. Sometimes the fights that found you were the ones that mattered most. He'd learned that in the Marines, and it was just as true here in this peaceful town as it had been in the war zones he'd left behind. This wasn't just about Maria anymore, or about some graffiti on his garage door. This was about what kind of community they wanted to be, and what kind of father he wanted to be for Emily. The line had been drawn, not by him, but by those who thought hate and fear could go unchallenged. Jack's boots crunched against broken glass in the auto shop's parking lot as he finished documenting the vandalism with his phone. His jaw clenched tight. The spray-painted message screamed its ugly truth in bright red letters. He'd already called Tom to help clean it up later, but first, he needed to check on Maria. The bell chimed as he pushed open the diner's door. The lunch rush was winding down, with only a few regulars lingering over coffee. Maria stood behind the counter, wiping down the surface with quick, nervous movements. When she looked up, her practiced smile faltered at the sight of him. "Jack," she said softly, her hand stilling on the counter. "I heard about. I'm so sorry." He slid onto a stool, noting how her fingers trembled slightly as she poured him coffee without asking. "Not your fault," he said firmly. "How are you holding up?" "Oh, I'm fine," Maria answered too quickly, her voice artificially bright. She busied herself organizing sugar packets that were already perfectly aligned. "Really, it's nothing I haven't dealt with before." Jack watched her hands shake as she knocked over the carefully arranged packets. She quickly gathered them up, but one slipped from her grasp. Before she could reach for it, Jack had already caught it mid-fall, his reflexes still sharp from his military days. "Maria." His voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to pretend with me." She paused, then let out a shaky breath. "I keep telling myself I'm used to it," she admitted quietly. "The looks, the whispers. But this," she gestured vaguely toward the direction of his shop. "They targeted you and Emily because of me. That's different." "They targeted themselves," Jack corrected. "The moment they chose hate, they became their own worst enemies." Maria's eyes grew glossy, but she blinked rapidly and turned to serve a customer who was waiting for his check. Jack noticed how she kept glancing at the door every time it opened, how she stayed closer to the counter instead of moving freely through the diner like she usually did. When she returned, he asked, "What time do you finish?" 8, she replied, then quickly added, "But I'll be fine. Mrs. Chen from the grocery store usually walks the same way home." "I'll walk you," Jack said. It wasn't a question. Maria started to protest. "Jack, you don't have to." 8 o'clock, he repeated firmly. "Emily's staying at her friend Sarah's house tonight for a study group. I'll be here." She hesitated, then nodded, relief flickering across her face. "Thank you." Throughout the afternoon, Jack worked on cars at his shop, his mind wandering to the diner every few minutes. Tom had helped him clean off most of the graffiti, but the ghost of those hateful words still burned in his memory. At 7:45, he locked up and walked the short distance to the diner. Maria was counting her tips when he arrived, her dark hair falling forward as she bent over the counter. She looked up at the bell's chime, and this time her smile was genuine, if tired. "Let me just grab my things," she said. While she went to the back room, Jack noticed something colorful sticking out of her apron pocket. It was a piece of paper, clearly drawn by a child's hand. His heart softened when he recognized Emily's artistic style. She had drawn 3 figures holding hands: a tall man in what was probably meant to be his work coveralls, a girl with pigtails that could only be herself, and a woman with long dark hair wearing an apron. Above them, in Emily's careful handwriting, were the words, "Maria and Daddy smiling." Maria emerged from the back room, now wearing a light jacket over her uniform. She noticed Jack looking at the drawing and touched it gently through her apron pocket. "Emily gave it to me this morning," she explained. "She came in with her friend's mom before school, said it was to make me happy when people are mean." Jack felt a surge of pride in his daughter's compassion. "She's got a big heart," he said softly. They stepped out into the evening air, walking side by side down Main Street. The stores were mostly closed now, their windows dark. Their footsteps echoed on the empty sidewalk. "I used to be scared of the quiet," Maria said suddenly. "Back home in El Paso, there was always noise, Music from the neighbors, kids playing in the street, my mama singing in the kitchen. She smiled at the memory. But here, I've learned to appreciate the peace. Most days, anyway. Jack nodded, understanding. War taught me to be wary of quiet, he admitted. Silence usually meant trouble was coming. Took me years to unlearn that instinct. Emily told me you were in Afghanistan, Maria said carefully. 3 tours, Jack confirmed. Lost some good friends there. Lost my wife Jane to cancer 2 years after I got back. He rarely spoke about this, but something about the night air and Maria's gentle presence made it easier. I'm sorry, Maria said softly. After a moment she added, Emily talks about her mother sometimes. She says you keep Jane's photo next to your workbench. Yeah, Jack smiled sadly. Can't seem to move it, even after all these years. They walked another block in comfortable silence before Maria spoke again. My papa died when I was 15, she shared. He always said the measure of a person isn't in how they handle good times, but in how they face the hard ones. Jack glanced at her profile in the streetlight. Sounds like a wise man. He would have liked you, Maria said, then blushed slightly. I mean, he would have respected what you did at the diner, standing up for people. That was important to him. They turned onto Cedar Street, where Maria lived in a small apartment above the florist shop. Jack noticed her hand drift to her apron pocket again, touching Emily's drawing. Despite everything that had happened that day, they both smiled, finding comfort in a child's simple expression of love and hope. This is me, Maria said, stopping at the side entrance to her building. She pulled out her keys, then turned to face Jack. Thank you, not just for the walk, but for, she trailed off, gesturing vaguely. Any time, Jack replied, meaning it. The elementary school hallway echoed with children's voices as Jack walked beside Emily toward her classroom. His daughter practically bounced with each step, her backpack bobbing up and down. She hadn't stopped talking about the Veterans Day celebration since breakfast. And Mrs. Peterson said we're going to make special cards for all the veterans who come. Emily's eyes sparkled. You have to come, Daddy. You just have to. Jack's stomach tightened. He'd avoided talking about his service since moving back home, especially at Emily's school. Honey, I don't know if... Mr. Turner! Mrs. Peterson appeared in her classroom doorway, warm smile lighting up her face. She was Emily's favorite teacher, known for her creative projects and kind heart. I'm so glad I caught you. Emily mentioned you served in the Marines? Jack nodded stiffly. Yes, ma'am. But that was a while ago. We're having several veterans speak to the class next week. The children would love to hear your story. She glanced at Emily, who was practically vibrating with excitement. It would mean so much to them. Please, Daddy. Emily tugged his sleeve. Maria said she'd help make everything look pretty too. Jack's eyebrows rose. Maria? Mrs. Peterson nodded. Miss Alvarez volunteers here sometimes. She offered to help with decorations and refreshments for our Veterans Day celebration. The image of Maria's gentle smile flashed through Jack's mind. Something in his chest loosened slightly. When exactly would this be? Next Thursday morning. Just a short talk about teamwork and service. Mrs. Peterson's eyes were kind, understanding. Whatever you're comfortable sharing. Emily's hopeful face was impossible to resist. Jack ran a hand through his hair and sighed. All right, Thursday morning. Yes, Emily threw her arms around his waist. You're the best, Daddy. I'll email you the details, Mrs. Peterson said. Thank you, Mr. Turner. This will mean so much to the children. The next week passed quickly. Jack found himself standing in Emily's classroom on Thursday morning, surrounded by hand-drawn American flags in red, white, and blue streamers. Maria had transformed the space with her artistic touch, making it festive without being overwhelming. She stood near the back now, wearing a blue dress instead of her diner uniform. When their eyes met, she gave him an encouraging smile. Emily sat front and center, practically glowing with pride. 25 fourth graders looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. Jack cleared his throat, his collar suddenly tight. Good morning, everyone. I'm Emily's dad, and I served in the United States Marine Corps for 12 years. A forest of hands shot up immediately. Jack couldn't help but smile. Yes? In the back? Did you fight bad guys? Were you scared? Did you drive a tank? Jack held up his hands. How about I tell you a story instead? One about what it really means to be brave. The children leaned forward eagerly, Even Mrs. Peterson settled into her chair, interested. "This happened in Afghanistan, in a place very different from our town," Jack began. "My team was helping protect a small village. One day, we got word that a bridge had been damaged in a storm. This wasn't just any bridge. It was the only way for the village children to get to their school." He paced slowly, remembering. The village was in a valley, with mountains all around. The bridge crossed a deep river. Without it, the children would have to stay home. They'd miss out on learning, on seeing their friends, on having a chance at a better future. Jack glanced at Maria, who watched intently. "My team decided to help fix that bridge. It wasn't our assigned mission. It wasn't going to win any battles. But sometimes being brave isn't about fighting. It's about building things up instead of tearing them down." The classroom was silent now, captivated. "We worked alongside the villagers for 3 days. Some of my Marines had never done construction before, but they learned. The village women brought us food and water. The children watched and cheered us on. Everyone worked together, even though we spoke different languages, came from different places." Jack's voice softened. "On the 4th day, when that bridge was finished, I watched 30 kids walk across it to their school. They were laughing, carrying their books, just like you do every morning. Their parents stood on both sides, crying happy tears. That's when I learned something important." He looked at each young face in turn. "Being brave isn't about being the strongest or the toughest. It's about helping others, even when it's hard. It's about working together to make things better." Every one of those villagers was brave. Every Marine who picked up a hammer instead of a rifle was brave. And every one of you is brave when you stand up for what's right, when you help someone who needs it. Emily beamed at him, her eyes shining. In the back, Maria dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Mrs. Peterson stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Turner. Class, what do we say?" "Thank you," the children chorused. Then came another wave of hands and questions, more excited than before. This time they asked about the village children, about what games they played, about what their school was like. Jack answered each question patiently, watching understanding dawn in their young faces. These children weren't interested in war stories. They were learning about connection, about how people from different worlds could work together to make something good. When the bell rang, several students rushed to give him hand-drawn thank you cards. Emily hugged him tight, whispering, "I knew you'd be amazing, Daddy." As the children filed out for recess, Maria approached. Her eyes were still misty, but her smile was warm. "That was beautiful, Jack. You taught them something precious today." Jack ducked his head, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just told them the truth." "Yes," Maria said softly. "That's exactly what made it beautiful." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the classroom windows as the last few students filed out. Jack helped Emily pack up her drawings while Maria finished taking down the red, white, and blue decorations she'd hung for his presentation. His daughter's classmates had been captivated by his carefully chosen story about teamwork during a humanitarian mission, one of the few memories that didn't keep him up at night. "That was amazing, Daddy." Emily hugged his waist. "Everyone thinks you're so cool now." Jack ruffled her hair, grateful she was too young to ask about the darker parts of his service. "Thanks, sweetie. Why don't you show Maria your special drawing while I help Mrs. Peterson move these desks back?" Emily skipped over to Maria, who was folding paper flags with careful hands. Jack watched them for a moment, struck by how naturally they'd connected. Maria listened intently as Emily explained her artwork, asking questions that made his daughter beam with pride. Once the classroom was back in order, Mrs. Peterson thanked them and headed to a staff meeting. Jack found himself alone with Maria and Emily, the late afternoon quiet, broken only by the distant sound of buses departing. "You're really good with kids," Jack said, helping Maria gather her purse and jacket. "They all loved the decorations you made." Maria smiled, though her eyes held a distant look. "I used to help at my mother's restaurant back home. The children would come in after school, and I'd give them paper and crayons while their parents finished work." She traced her finger along one of Emily's drawings. "I always dreamed of having my own cafe like that, somewhere warm and welcoming, where everyone feels like family." "That sounds wonderful," Emily said, looking up from her coloring. "You make the best chocolate chip pancakes. Everyone would love them." Maria laughed softly. "Maybe someday. For now, I'm grateful to work at the diner." She paused, then added quietly, "Even if some people don't want me there." Jack felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same tension he'd carried since losing Emily's mother. I understand that feeling. After Sarah passed, all I wanted was to give Emily stability, a normal life. He watched his daughter gathering her school supplies, her movements so like her mother's it made his heart ache. But sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough, if I'm too— He struggled for the right word. Careful? Maria suggested gently. Jack nodded. With everything. With the shop, with letting people in. He met her eyes briefly before looking away. It's easier to keep your distance, isn't it? Safer. Safer? Yes. Maria's voice was soft but steady, but lonely too. My mother always said that a closed door keeps out both trouble and blessings. Emily appeared between them, clutching her backpack. Can Maria come have dinner with us tonight, Daddy? Please? Before Jack could respond, Maria touched Emily's shoulder. Not tonight, Carino. I have the evening shift at the diner, but thank you for asking. Jack felt simultaneously relieved and disappointed. These moments with Maria stirred something he'd thought long buried, a desire for connection that terrified him. Maybe another time, he found himself saying, surprising them both. They walked together through the school's main entrance, Emily chattering about next week's art project. The parking lot was nearly empty now, the late afternoon sun painting everything in warm gold. Jack noticed Maria checking her watch. I can give you a ride to work, he offered. It's on our way home. Oh, I couldn't impose. Please? Emily took Maria's hand. Then we can show you our car. Daddy fixed it all by himself. Maria's resistance melted under Emily's enthusiasm. All right, Gracias. As they crossed the parking lot, Jack found himself sharing more about the shop, about his dreams of expanding it someday, maybe even teaching Emily the trade if she was interested. Maria listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. You're good at fixing things, she observed as they approached his restored pickup truck. Not just cars. Jack helped Emily into the back seat, considering Maria's words. He'd spent years fixing machines because they were simpler than people. Their problems had clear solutions. Their parts fit together in logical ways. But lately, he'd found himself wanting to fix other things too. The sadness in Emily's eyes when she saw other kids with their mothers, the way some people in town treated Maria, his own reluctance to let anyone past his carefully constructed walls. Sometimes fixing things isn't enough, he admitted, opening the passenger door for Maria. Sometimes you have to build something new. Maria's eyes met his, understanding passing between them. Yes, she said softly, something new. As Jack walked around to the driver's side, movement caught his eye. Two men stood in the shadow of the school building, their postures familiar in an unpleasant way. Even at this distance, he recognized them as the troublemakers from the diner. They were watching, heads close together, as they muttered something he couldn't hear. Jack's body tensed automatically, muscle memory from years of combat awareness taking over. His hand tightened on the door handle as he assessed possible threats, escape routes, defensive positions, all while maintaining an outwardly calm demeanor. He didn't want to alarm Emily or Maria, but his instincts screamed that this was more than casual observation. He climbed into the truck, starting the engine with steady hands that belied his internal alertness. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Jack watched the men in his rearview mirror, his Marine training noting every detail of their appearance and behavior. The evening light filtered through the diner's windows, casting a warm glow over the packed room. Red, white, and blue streamers hung from the ceiling, and small American flags decorated each table. Maria had transformed the humble diner into something special for Veterans Night. Emily darted between tables in her best dress, placing handmade thank you cards beside each veteran's plate. Her dark curls bounced with every step, matching her endless energy. Maria, where should I put the extra cards? She called out, waving a stack of colorful paper. Maria looked up from arranging cookies on a tray, her face flushed from the kitchen heat. Put them by the entrance, sweetie. That way everyone gets one when they come in. She smiled, watching Emily skip away. The girl had spent hours making those cards, each one decorated with stars and heartfelt messages. Jack stood near the back wall, tugging at his collar. He'd worn his best shirt, the blue one Emily had picked out, but he felt exposed. Too many eyes kept glancing his way. Too many whispers followed him. His fingers twitched, wanting to loosen his tie. You okay, Dad? Emily appeared at his side, Slipping her small hand into his, he squeezed her hand gently. "Just nervous, kiddo. But you talked to my whole class." "This is just like that." Jack shook his head. "Different crowd tonight, these folks." He gestured to the veterans scattered throughout the room. "They know. They understand." Maria approached them, carrying a fresh pot of coffee. "Everything's ready, Jack. Would you like some coffee before you speak?" "Thanks, Maria." He accepted the cup, their fingers brushing briefly. The warmth of the coffee steadied his hands. The diner had never been so full. Regular customers mixed with veterans and their families. Even Tom, his old Marine buddy, had shown up with his wife. The mayor sat near the front, and Jack recognized faces from Emily's school, the auto parts store, and the church. Maria tapped a spoon against her glass, the clear ring bringing conversations to a halt. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her accent adding warmth to her words. "We're here to honor our veterans and raise money for the local VA center, and we're especially grateful to have Jack Turner share his story with us." The room applauded. Emily bounced on her toes, beaming up at her father. Jack took a deep breath and walked to the front of the diner. Standing before the crowd, Jack's mind flashed to other gatherings, pre-mission briefings, memorial services, homecoming celebrations. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. "I'm not much for public speaking," he started, his voice low but carrying. "But my daughter Emily insisted." This earned a gentle laugh from the crowd. And when Maria suggested this fundraiser, well, he shrugged. Sometimes the right people make you brave enough to do the hard things. Jack's hand steadied as he continued. "Being a Marine taught me about brotherhood, about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." His eyes found Maria's in the crowd, remembering that first night he'd spoken up for her. "We lost good men overseas, brothers who never came home." Jack's voice roughened. "For a long time, after I returned, I thought the best way to honor them was to stay quiet, keep to myself. But that's not what they died for." The room was silent now, hanging on his words. Even Emily had stopped fidgeting, watching her father with wide eyes. "They died so we could live fully, so we could build communities where everyone belongs, so we could stand up and say, 'This isn't right,' when we see injustice." Jack's voice grew stronger. "They died so little girls like my Emily could grow up in a town where people look out for each other, where we celebrate our differences instead of fearing them." Tom nodded from his seat, understanding in his eyes. Other veterans straightened, recognition passing between them. "Tonight isn't just about remembering the past," Jack continued. "It's about building the future, about showing our children what courage looks like in everyday life." He glanced at Emily, who was practically glowing with pride. "Sometimes courage means speaking up in a diner when someone's being mistreated. Sometimes it means organizing events like this one." He nodded toward Maria. "Sometimes it just means showing up and saying, 'I'm here. You're not alone.'" Jack's words settled over the room like a blessing. "The money we raise tonight will help veterans who are still fighting battles at home. But more than that, I hope tonight reminds us all that we're stronger together. That's what my brothers taught me. That's what I want to teach my daughter. That's what this community has shown me these past few weeks." The silence held for a moment after he finished. Then someone started clapping. The applause spread like wildfire, building until it filled the entire diner. Veterans stood, offering the highest respect they could give. The mayor wiped his eyes. Tom gave a sharp whistle of approval. Jack made his way back to his seat beside Emily, his heart pounding but his spirit lighter than it had been in years. His daughter threw her arms around him, pressing her face into his shirt. "Daddy's a hero again," she whispered, her voice full of wonder and love. Under the table, hidden from view, Maria's hand found his and squeezed gently. Her touch carried understanding, pride, and something more, something that made Jack's heart skip a beat. He squeezed back, allowing himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his brothers would be proud of him tonight. The good feelings from Veterans Night evaporated the moment Jack turned onto his street. Even in the darkness, he could see something was wrong at his shop. His headlights swept across the building, revealing shattered glass glittering on the pavement. "Stay in the car, Emily," Jack ordered, his voice tight. He pulled up slowly, scanning the area before killing the engine. "But Daddy..." "Stay put." His Marine training kicked in as he stepped out, carefully approaching the building. The damage was extensive. Every window had been smashed, and crude words covered the walls in red spray paint. Broken glass crunched under his boots as he moved closer. The smell of paint was still fresh. This had happened while they were at the diner. His heart stopped when he spotted Emily's pink bicycle, or what was left of it. The frame was bent, the wheels twisted beyond repair. She'd gotten it for her birthday just 2 months ago. Oh no! Emily's small voice came from behind him. She hadn't listened, of course. Jack turned quickly, trying to shield her from the worst of it. "I told you to stay in the car, sweetheart." But she'd already seen her bike. Her lower lip trembled as she reached for the mangled handlebars. Why would someone do this? The question hit him like a punch to the gut. Rage boiled up inside him, not just at the destruction, but at himself. He'd brought this on them. By standing up at the diner, by getting involved, by letting Maria into their lives. "Back to the car, Emily, now." His voice was gentle but firm. Once she was safely inside, Jack pulled out his phone and called the police. Officer Martinez arrived 15 minutes later, shaking his head as he surveyed the damage. "This is escalating, Jack," Martinez said, snapping photos. "Any idea who might have done this?" Jack thought of the 2 men from the diner, but he had no proof. "Maybe. We'll increase patrols in the area, but..." Martinez hesitated. "You might want to consider installing security cameras." After the officer left, Jack stood in his office, staring at the Marine Corps flag still perfectly folded in its display case, untouched amid the chaos. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd fought overseas to protect people, only to find the battle had followed him home. His phone buzzed. A text from Maria. "Just heard what happened. Coming over." "No," he typed back quickly. "Stay away. Not safe." But 10 minutes later, her car pulled up anyway. Emily had fallen asleep in the waiting room chair, exhausted from the night's events. Maria gasped when she saw the damage. "Oh, Jack." She reached for his arm, but he stepped back. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice rough. "I want to help. We can clean this up together. Maybe get some boards for the windows until..." "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. "This isn't your problem." Maria's eyes flashed. "Not my problem? Those words on your wall are about me. This happened because you stood up for me." "Exactly." Jack ran a hand over his face, suddenly feeling every one of his years. "I made this mess by getting involved. I should have just kept my head down, stayed quiet like everyone else." "You don't mean that. Look around, Maria. Look what they did to my daughter's bike. What if she'd been here? What if..." His voice cracked. The what-ifs were destroying him. "Jack, please, don't let them win like this. We can stand together. The community will..." "The community?" He laughed bitterly. "Where were they tonight? Where were they when those guys were harassing you at the diner? Everyone just watched." Maria fell silent, hurt crossing her features. Jack could see her hands trembling slightly, just like they had that first night at the diner. The sight twisted something inside him. "I can't do this," he said quietly. "I can't drag you into this storm, Emily. She's all I have. I have to protect her. By teaching her to hide? To run away when things get hard?" Maria's voice was soft but challenging. "By teaching her to survive." Jack turned away, unable to look at her. "It's better if we just go back to how things were before." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Maria's footsteps moved toward the door. She paused there, and Jack could feel her eyes on him. "You're not the only one who knows about survival, Jack Turner," she said quietly. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Jack stood in his vandalized shop, surrounded by broken glass and hate-filled words, feeling like he'd just broken something far more precious than windows. Through the shattered glass, he watched Maria's taillights disappear into the night. His fingers brushed the Marine Corps flag, remembering all the times he'd fought for what was right. But this time, walking away felt like the only way to keep his daughter safe, even if it meant losing something, someone that had started to feel like hope. Emily stirred in her chair, mumbling in her sleep. Jack went to her, gently picking her up like he used to when she was smaller. She curled into his chest, trusting him completely. The weight of her trust pressed down on him like a physical thing. Tomorrow, he'd have to explain why they wouldn't be going to the diner anymore, why Maria wouldn't be coming around. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that sometimes the right thing feels like the wrong thing? That sometimes protecting people means letting them go? He carried Emily to the car, careful not to wake her. The broken glass crunched under his feet, each step a reminder of what hatred could do, what fear could destroy. As he drove home through the quiet streets, his daughter sleeping beside him, Jack tried to convince himself he was doing the right thing, but the empty feeling in his chest suggested otherwise. Jack sat alone at his kitchen table, the house quiet except for the gentle ticking of the wall clock. Emily had finally fallen asleep after crying about her destroyed bike. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow on Sarah's photograph propped against the sugar bowl. His late wife's smile beamed back at him, captured forever in that summer snapshot from 6 years ago. Her dark hair danced in the wind, her eyes crinkled with joy as she held a 3-year-old Emily on her hip. Jack reached out, his calloused fingers tracing the edge of the silver frame. "What would you tell me to do, Sarah?" he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. The memories flooded back. Sarah's unwavering support when he struggled after returning from Afghanistan, her gentle persistence in helping him open up again. "You always said being brave wasn't just about facing bullets," Jack murmured, remembering her words. "You said the real courage was in letting people in." He pulled out his worn leather wallet, unfolding a small piece of paper tucked behind his driver's license. It was Sarah's last note to him, written from her hospital bed. The ink had faded slightly, but her words remained clear. "Promise me, you'll keep your heart open, Jack. Love isn't meant to be buried with me." Tears slipped down his face, dropping onto the table's wooden surface. His shoulders shook as he finally allowed himself to feel the weight of everything. The fear of losing someone again, the burden of protecting Emily, the guilt over wanting to help Maria while worried it would bring more trouble. "I don't know how to do this without you," he admitted quietly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. The silence of the house seemed to press in around him, making him feel more alone than ever. Jack folded his hands and bowed his head, something he hadn't done much since Sarah's passing. "Lord," he began hesitantly, "I could use some guidance here. Sarah always knew what to say, how to make things clear. I'm lost without her compass." His prayer continued, halting at first, then flowing more freely as he poured out his fears. He spoke of his worry for Emily, his anger at the vandals, his confusion about his growing feelings for Maria, and his terror at the thought of having his heart broken again. The kitchen clock chimed midnight, startling him from his thoughts. Jack stood up, his joints stiff from sitting so long. He carried Sarah's photo to the window, holding it up to the moonlight. Her smile seemed different now, knowing, almost challenging, like she was daring him to remember who he really was. "You always said I was stubborn," he whispered to her image, managing a small smile. "Said my biggest problem was trying to carry everything alone." A floorboard creaked behind him, and he turned to find Emily standing in her pajamas, hugging her stuffed rabbit. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head, patting over to lean against him. "I heard you talking to Mom." Jack wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I miss her, kiddo." "Me too." Emily touched the photograph with gentle fingers. "Remember how Mom used to say that brave people don't just fight bad guys? They fight for good things too?" Jack's breath caught in his throat. Even after all these years, Sarah's wisdom kept finding ways to reach him through their daughter's innocent understanding. "What do you think she'd say about Maria?" Emily asked, looking up at him with eyes so much like her mother's. Jack swallowed hard. I think she'd tell me I'm being silly, trying to protect everyone by pushing them away." "Mom always said you were silly sometimes." Emily agreed with a small giggle, then grew serious. "Can we visit her tomorrow? I want to tell her about Maria." Jack kissed the top of her head. "First thing in the morning, sweetheart." Dawn broke clear and cool the next day as Jack and Emily made their way through the cemetery's iron gates. They followed the familiar path to Sarah's grave, Emily clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd insisted on picking along the way. The morning sun caught the engraving on the headstone. "Sarah Elizabeth Turner, beloved wife and mother, love bears all things." Emily arranged her flowers carefully at the base, while Jack stood with his hands in his pockets, heart heavy with all he wanted to say. "Hi, Mom," Emily said, settling cross-legged on the grass. "I brought you flowers, and I need to tell you about our friend Maria. She's really nice, and she makes the best chocolate milkshakes, and she has a pretty smile like yours." Jack listened as his daughter chatted away, telling Sarah about the diner, the Veterans Night, and how Maria had helped decorate her school project. His chest tightened as Emily's voice grew softer. "I think Daddy's scared, Mom," she confided. "He wants to help Maria, but he doesn't want anyone to get hurt. But you always said we should help people who need friends, right?" Emily turned to look up at her father, her young face full of wisdom beyond her years. "Mom would want us to help Maria," she whispered, reaching for his hand. Jack squeezed her small fingers, the truth of her words settling deep in his heart. He looked at Sarah's headstone, remembering all the times she'd pushed him to be better, to be braver, to choose love over fear. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Jack's truck pulled into the diner's parking lot. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white. Through the window, he could see Maria moving between tables, her shoulders tense as she carried plates of eggs and toast. Jack took a deep breath, remembering Emily's words at Sarah's grave. His daughter was right. Running away wasn't the answer. He'd done enough of that since losing Sarah. The bell above the door chimed as he entered. A few regular customers looked up, then quickly backed down at their plates. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Maria glanced his way, then turned toward the kitchen, her face carefully blank. "Maria!" Jack called out, his voice gentle but firm. "Can we talk?" She paused, coffee pot in hand, then nodded slightly. "My break is in 10 minutes. Jack settled into a booth near the back, watching as she finished serving her tables. Her movements were efficient, but guarded, like someone expecting a blow. The sight made his chest ache. When Maria finally slid into the seat across from him, she kept her eyes on her folded hands. "I heard about your shop," she said softly. "I'm so sorry, Jack." "I'm the one who should be sorry," Jack replied, his voice rough with emotion. "I was wrong to push you away. I got scared. Not of them, but of—" He struggled to find the right words. "Of letting someone else in. Of failing to protect the people I care about. Again." Maria looked up then, her eyes meeting his. "You didn't fail anyone, Jack." "Maybe not," he said. "But losing Sarah, watching Emily grow up without her mother, it changed me, made me think keeping my distance was safer." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "But that's not living, is it? And it's not what I taught Emily about standing up for what's right." "No, it's not," Maria agreed softly. A small smile touched her lips. "Emily is very wise for her age." Jack chuckled despite himself. "She gets that from her mother." His expression grew serious again. "I won't run anymore, Maria. Whatever happens, we face it together. If you're willing to give me another chance." Maria was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Then she reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I understand fear, Jack. I live with it every day in this town. But I also believe in hope. And in good people who stand up for what's right." Relief washed over Jack's features. "Thank you," he said simply. "Besides," Maria added, her eyes twinkling, "Emily would never forgive me if I didn't." They shared a laugh, and Jack felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. It wasn't until that moment that he realized how much he'd missed her presence in their lives, even after such a short time. "There's something else," Jack said, straightening in his seat. "I'm going to speak at the town hall meeting next week, about the vandalism, about what's been happening in town. It's time someone said something out loud." Maria's eyes widened. "Jack, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted gently. "We both know this isn't just about my shop. It's about you, about anyone who's different in their eyes. And I won't sit quiet while they try to drive good people away with fear." A customer at another table overheard and whispered to his companion. Within minutes, the news began spreading through the diner like wildfire. Jack could see the reactions, some nodding in approval, others scowling into their coffee cups. "It won't be easy," Maria warned, though her eyes shone with gratitude. "Nothing worth doing ever is," Jack replied, thinking of his years in the Marines, of raising Emily alone, of learning to live after Sarah. "But this town needs to make a choice about who it wants to be, and I've made mine." The door chimed again, and Jack looked up to see Tom, his old Marine buddy, walking in. Tom caught his eye and gave a slight nod, having clearly heard the news already. More customers entered behind him, some Jack recognized as fellow veterans from the fundraiser night. Maria squeezed his hand one more time before standing. "I should get back to work," she said. She hesitated, then added softly, "Thank you, Jack, For everything. Thank you for not giving up on me," he replied. As Maria returned to her duties, Jack could feel the energy in the diner shifting. Conversations buzzed in hushed tones. Phones came out as people spread the word about his planned speech. Some faces showed support, others concern, and a few barely concealed anger. Tom slid into the booth across from him, coffee in hand. "Word travels fast in this town," he commented. "Too fast sometimes," Jack agreed. "You sure about this, brother?" Jack thought of Emily's face when she saw her destroyed bike, of Maria's trembling hands as she tried to hide her fear, of Sarah's voice in his memory urging him to be brave in love, not just in war. "I've never been more sure," he answered. The morning sun climbed higher outside the diner windows, casting away the last of the shadows on Main Street. Inside, the air hummed with anticipation of change, for better or worse. Jack watched Maria move between tables, her head held higher now, and knew he'd made the right choice. The town would have to decide which side of history it wanted to be on, but Jack Turner had already decided his. The old town hall's wooden floors creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the town. Every bench was filled, with people standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The air felt thick with tension, whispers bouncing off the high ceiling like angry bees. Jack sat in the front row, his weathered hands clasped together. Emily sat beside him, her small hand wrapped around his arm. Maria occupied the seat on his other side, her face a mask of quiet determination. The mayor stood at the podium, discussing recent unfortunate incidents in careful diplomatic terms that made Jack's jaw clench. In the back corner, Jack spotted the two men from the diner. They weren't smirking now, but their eyes held a cold challenge. A few rows behind Jack, he could sense the presence of his old Marine unit, Tom and 3 others who'd served with him. They'd shown up without him asking, just like they always had in Afghanistan. "Would anyone like to address these concerns?" the mayor asked, his voice echoing through the hall. Jack stood slowly, Emily's hand slipping from his arm. The walk to the podium felt longer than any patrol he'd ever done. His combat boots, worn today for the first time in years, made solid sounds against the wooden floor. Each step reminded him of marching with his unit, of standing guard, of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. At the microphone, Jack gripped the podium's edges. The faces before him blurred slightly, then came into sharp focus. He saw Mrs. Peterson, who brought her car to his shop every month. Mr. Rodriguez, whose son he'd helped with math homework while fixing their family's truck. Faces he knew, faces he didn't. All waiting. His throat felt dry. He'd never been one for speeches, but he remembered Emily's face when she saw her destroyed bicycle. He remembered Maria's trembling hands as she served coffee. He remembered Sarah, his late wife, telling him that true courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about doing what's right, despite the fear. "Some of you know me," Jack began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I fix your cars. I coach Little League sometimes. I'm Emily's dad." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "And yes, I served as a Marine." The silence in the room grew heavier. In the Corps we lived by code, honor, courage, commitment. These weren't just words to us, they were promises. Promises we made to our country, to each other, and to ourselves. His voice grew stronger. "When I came home, I tried to live a quiet life. Raise my daughter, run my business, keep to myself." Jack's eyes found the 2 men in the back. But sometimes staying quiet means breaking those promises. Sometimes silence makes us complicit in wrong things, and I can't do that anymore. He straightened his shoulders, standing taller. "A few weeks ago, in the diner, I said something simple. I said, leave her alone. I said it because it was right. Because when someone is being harassed, threatened, made to feel less than human because of where they come from or what they look like, staying silent isn't an option." The room remained still, but Jack could feel the energy shifting. "Since then, my shop's been vandalized. My daughter's bike was destroyed. There have been threats." His voice hardened slightly. "But here's what I want everyone to understand. I said leave her alone, and I'll keep saying it, because dignity belongs to us all." Jack's eyes swept the room. "This town taught me about community when I lost my wife. You brought food. You helped with Emily. You showed up. That's who we really are. Not bullies, not cowards who spray paint hate in the dark. We're better than that." He looked directly at Maria, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. "Every person in this town deserves respect. Every person deserves to feel safe. And if we can fight for freedom overseas, we can sure as hell fight for it right here at home." The silence that followed felt like it might shatter the windows. Jack stood straight, unflinching, his gaze steady. He didn't look away from the crowd, didn't shrink from the weight of what he'd said. Then, from the middle of the room, Tom stood up. Without a word, he raised his hand in a crisp salute. One by one, the other Marines in the room rose, saluting their former officer. The gesture spread like a wave, veterans from different eras, different branches, standing to show their support. The applause started slowly, then built like thunder. Mrs. Peterson was on her feet, clapping hard. Mr. Rodriguez whistled through his fingers. Even the mayor had tears in his eyes. In the back, the two harassers seemed to shrink, their faces red with shame as neighbors turned to stare at them. Their power, built on intimidation and darkness, crumbled in the face of open courage and unity. Emily ran to her father, wrapping her arms around his waist. Maria stood too, her head held high, dignity radiating from her like light. The applause continued, washing away the fear and hatred that had poisoned their town's air. Jack hugged his daughter close, feeling the weight of the past weeks lifting from his shoulders. He'd made his choice. He'd kept his promise. And in doing so, he'd helped his town remember its own promises, too. The Marines who'd served with him moved closer, forming a protective circle around Jack, Emily, and Maria. It wasn't just a gesture of support. It was a declaration. What had started with two simple words in a diner had become something much bigger. A community rediscovering its heart, its courage, and its commitment to standing together. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as a crowd gathered outside Jack's auto repair shop. What started as a few volunteers had grown into dozens of people carrying paint cans, brushes, and cleaning supplies. The hatred that had been sprayed across his garage door was about to disappear under fresh coats of paint. Tom, Jack's former Marine buddy, organized the volunteers into teams with military precision. "All right, folks, Johnson family, you're on window duty. Pastor Mike's group, tackle that graffiti. Rodriguez family, help Emily clear the debris." Jack stood back, watching in amazement as his neighbors transformed his vandalized shop. Emily darted between the workers, wielding her kid-sized broom with determination. Her pigtails bounced as she swept, humming a tune she'd learned in school. "I can't believe all these people came," Maria said softly, appearing at Jack's side. She held 2 cups of coffee from the diner, offering one to him. Jack accepted the coffee, his fingers brushing hers. "Neither can I," he admitted. The warmth in his chest had nothing to do with the hot drink. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop across the street arranged potted plants near the newly repaired windows. "These will brighten things up," she declared, smiling at Maria. "And you must join our downtown business association meetings, dear. We meet every Tuesday." Maria's eyes widened. She'd never been invited before. Thank you. I'd like that." Emily ran up to them, her face flushed with excitement. "Dad! Maria! Look what Mr. Rodriguez brought." She pointed to where the hardware store owner was unloading brand new tools to replace the ones that had been damaged. "That's mighty kind of him," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. More people arrived throughout the morning. The high school football team showed up to help move heavy equipment. The local coffee shop sent over boxes of pastries. Even the town's police chief stopped by, publicly assuring them that the vandals would face consequences. Maria watched it all with glistening eyes. "I never thought," she trailed off, dabbing at her cheeks with her apron. Emily hugged her around the waist. "Don't cry, Maria. Everyone loves you now, just like we do." Jack felt his heart skip at his daughter's words, but Maria just laughed and hugged Emily back. "These are happy tears, sweetie." By early afternoon, the shop looked better than it had in years. The walls gleamed with fresh paint, windows sparkled, and new security lights had been installed. Someone had even created a beautiful mural on one wall, a Marine Corps emblem intertwined with flowers in the colors of the Mexican flag. "The artist said it represents unity?" Tom explained, clapping Jack on the shoulder. "Not bad, huh?" Jack nodded, too moved to speak. He remembered all the times he'd felt alone after losing his wife, all the days he'd kept to himself, afraid to let anyone in. "Now, Looking at his transformed shop and the community that had rallied around them, he realized how wrong he'd been. Emily continued sweeping, though there wasn't much left to clean. She took her job seriously, wanting everything to be perfect. Several people had brought her new decorations for her little corner of the shop where she did homework after school. "Look, Maria," she called out. "Mrs. Wilson brought me a new desk lamp, and it has butterflies on it." Maria walked over to admire the lamp, and Jack watched them together. His daughter had never stopped believing in people's goodness, even when he had. Maybe that's why she'd seen something special in Maria, right from the start. As the afternoon wore on, people began to drift away, leaving behind a shop that looked nothing like the vandalized building of yesterday. The hate had been painted over with love, the damage repaired by caring hands. "Jack," Maria said quietly when most people had gone. "I don't know how to thank everyone." "You don't have to," he replied. "This is what community should be." Emily finished her sweeping with a flourish. "Can we go to the diner now? I'm starving." Jack and Maria exchanged glances, sharing a smile. "I think we've earned it," Jack said. The diner was busy when they arrived, but their usual booth, the one where they'd first met, was mysteriously empty. The hostess winked at them as they sat down. Emily slid into her spot by the window, practically bouncing. "This is the best day ever." Maria sat across from them, still wearing her work apron, but now as a manager, not just a waitress. The promotion had come shortly after the town hall meeting. "The usual?" their server asked, grinning at them. "Yes, please," Emily answered for all of them. She knew their orders by heart now. The diner hummed with warm conversation and clinking plates. Regular customers nodded friendly greetings to them, so different from the suspicious glances of before. Even the corner booth where the troublemakers used to sit was filled with a young family, their children coloring placemats with crayons. Their food arrived quickly. A cheeseburger for Emily, grilled chicken sandwich for Jack, and Maria's favorite chicken fajitas. They fell into easy conversation, sharing stories about the day. "Did you see Tommy from my class helping paint?" Emily asked between bites of her burger. "He got blue paint in his hair." Maria laughed, a sound that filled Jack with joy. "I saw that." His mother was not happy about it. "Worth it, though," Jack added, smiling. "That boy worked harder than some grown men I know." Emily launched into another story about her classmates who'd helped, her words tumbling out between French fries. Jack and Maria listened, exchanging occasional glances that held more meaning than words could express. The diner's lights grew warmer as evening settled outside. Their booth felt like an island of happiness, filled with Emily's chatter, Maria's musical laughter, and Jack's contented smile. The wounds of the past few weeks were healing, transformed by the power of a community that had finally chosen to stand together. The wooden steps of the old church creaked under Jack's feet as he climbed them slowly. The morning air was crisp, and wisps of fog still clung to the ground. He paused at the entrance, his hand hesitating on the heavy wooden door. Through the stained glass windows, he could see the warm glow of early morning light, painting the sanctuary in soft colors. Pastor Williams looked up from his desk when Jack knocked on his office door. "Jack, come in. Come in." The pastor's gentle smile and welcoming gesture made Jack feel a bit more at ease. The office was cozy, with well-worn leather chairs and shelves lined with books. The smell of coffee wafted through the air. "Would you like some coffee?" Pastor Williams asked, already reaching for an extra mug. "Thanks, Pastor." Jack accepted the steaming cup, wrapping his hands around its warmth. He sat down heavily in one of the chairs, his shoulders tense. "Something's weighing on you," the pastor observed quietly. It wasn't a question. Jack stared into his coffee, watching the steam rise. "I've been carrying things since Afghanistan." His voice was rough. "Things I never talked about, not even with Sarah before she." He trailed off, swallowing hard. Pastor Williams leaned forward slightly, his eyes kind. "The weight of combat doesn't leave easily, does it?" "No, sir, it doesn't." Jack's fingers tightened around the mug. "I keep thinking about my men, the ones who didn't make it home. And now, with everything happening with Maria and the threats." He shook his head. "I feel like I'm back there sometimes, watching danger around every corner." "That's a heavy burden to carry alone," Pastor Williams said softly. "Emily needs me to be strong," Jack continued. "And Maria. She's facing her own battles. I don't want to add my darkness to her life." The pastor was quiet for a moment, considering. "Jack, do you remember the story of Simon helping Jesus carry his cross?" Jack nodded slowly. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is let others help carry our burdens. It's not weakness to need support, it's human. Pastor Williams leaned back in his chair. You've been trying to protect everyone by keeping your pain locked away. But true courage isn't just about facing physical danger. Sometimes it's about choosing to let love in, choosing to be part of a community. Jack felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. I'm scared, he admitted quietly. Of feeling too much. Of losing people again. That's natural, Pastor Williams replied. Love always involves risk. But Jack, consider this. Maybe God didn't just put Maria and Emily in your life for you to protect them. Maybe He also put them there to help heal you. Tears pricked at Jack's eyes. He quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. Your combat experience taught you to be a guardian, a protector, the pastor continued. Those are valuable traits. But God is calling you to be more than a sentinel. He's calling you to be fully human again, to laugh, to love, to be part of something bigger than your pain. Jack took a shaky breath. Sarah used to tell me I needed to let people in more. She was wise, Pastor Williams smiled. And I believe she'd be proud of how you're standing up for what's right with Maria. But she'd also want you to find joy again, Jack. To let yourself be cared for, not just be the caregiver. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, finishing their coffee. The morning light grew stronger, warming the office. Thank you, Pastor, Jack said finally, standing up. I needed this. Anytime, Jack. You're not alone in this journey. Pastor Williams stood and clasped Jack's shoulder. And remember, courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it looks like charging into battle, but sometimes it looks like opening your heart to new possibilities. As Jack walked down the church steps, he felt lighter somehow. The morning had fully bloomed now, the fog burned away by sunshine. He stopped at the flower shop on the corner, an idea forming. 20 minutes later, he pushed open the diner's door, a bouquet of bright yellow daisies in his hand. Emily was already there, having walked over from school to help Maria with the lunch prep. Both looked up as he entered. Maria's eyes widened at the sight of the flowers. Jack? What's this? Just wanted to brighten your day, he said, suddenly feeling shy. He held out the bouquet. Maria took the flowers, her cheeks flushing pink. They're beautiful, she whispered, burying her nose in the petals. Emily giggled from behind the counter. Daddy has a crush, she sang out, making both adults blush harder. To Jack's surprise, Maria didn't look away embarrassed. Instead, she met his eyes with a warm smile that made his heart skip. They both started laughing, joined by Emily's delighted giggles. The morning sun streamed through the diner windows, catching the yellow petals in Maria's shining eyes. And for the first time in years, Jack felt truly, completely present in a moment of joy. The spring sunshine streamed through the diner's freshly cleaned windows, casting warm patches of light across the checkered floor. Maria stood behind the counter, her new manager's name tag gleaming. She carefully arranged a display of fresh-baked pies, her hands moving with confident precision. The promotion had come as a surprise. The diner's owner had called her into his office last week, praising her dedication and the way she'd helped bring the community together. Those pies smell amazing, Jack said as he walked in, still wearing his work uniform with Turner Auto Repair stitched above the pocket. The shop had been bustling lately, with new customers coming from 3 towns over after hearing about his stand at the town hall. Maria's face lit up. Just finished baking them. Apple and cherry. Emily's favorites. Speaking of Emily, Jack glanced at his watch. I better head to the school. Want to join us for dinner tonight? Emily's been talking about teaching you her secret spaghetti sauce recipe all week. I wouldn't miss it, Maria replied, her eyes twinkling. My shift ends at 5. At Riverside Elementary, the final bell rang through the halls. Emily burst out of her classroom, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she ran to meet her father. Her best friend Sarah trailed behind her. Daddy, Emily called out, launching herself into his arms. Guess what? I got an A on my history project, and Sarah's coming to my birthday party next week, and she wants to meet Maria. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. Emily says Maria makes the best chocolate chip cookies ever. Maria's like family now, Emily declared proudly, making Jack's heart warm. She even helped me fix my bike last weekend, just like Daddy taught her. On the drive home, Emily chattered about her day, her excitement building as they approached their house. Can I call Maria to make sure she didn't forget about dinner? Jack chuckled. She'll be here, sweetheart. She promised, remember? The kitchen soon filled with the sounds of cooking and laughter. Maria arrived exactly at 5:30, carrying a small bag of fresh ingredients. Emily immediately pulled her toward the stove, eager to share her mother's sauce recipe. "First you have to crush the garlic just right," Emily instructed seriously, demonstrating with the garlic press. Maria followed her directions carefully, treating each step as if it were a sacred ritual. Jack watched them from the doorway, his heart full. The scene before him, his daughter and Maria working together in the kitchen, the house filled with warmth and the aroma of cooking. It felt right, complete, somehow. As they sat down to eat, Emily regaled them with stories from school. "Miss Thompson asked us to draw our families today," she said between bites of spaghetti. "I drew you and me, Daddy and Maria too, and I drew Mommy as an angel watching over us." A comfortable silence fell over the table. Maria reached over and squeezed Emily's hand gently. "That sounds beautiful, honey," Jack said softly, his voice thick with emotion. After dinner, Maria helped Emily with her math homework, while Jack cleaned up the kitchen. The everyday domesticity of the moment struck him. How naturally Maria had become part of their lives, how much lighter his heart felt these days. When it was time for Maria to leave, Emily hugged her tightly. "See you tomorrow at the diner." "Sweet dreams, Pequeña," Maria said, using the nickname she'd given Emily. She caught Jack's eye and smiled warmly before heading out into the cool evening air. Later, as Jack tucked Emily into bed, she clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, a gift from her mother, close to her chest. The moonlight filtered through her curtains, casting soft shadows on her walls. "Daddy?" Emily's voice was sleepy but thoughtful. "Yes, sweetheart? Do you think Mommy's happy we're not alone anymore?" Jack's throat tightened with emotion. He leaned down and kissed her forehead gently, remembering his late wife's bright smile and her constant reminder that love was meant to be shared. "Yes, sweetheart. I know she island." Sunlight poured through the diner's windows, painting golden squares across their favorite corner booth. The Sunday morning crowd had thinned out, leaving behind the comfortable buzz of coffee machines and distant kitchen clatter. Jack sat back against the worn leather seat, watching Emily arrange her pancakes into a silly face with fruit for eyes and whipped cream for hair. "Look, Maria, it's got your smile," Emily giggled, pointing to the curved line of syrup she'd drawn below the strawberry eyes. Maria leaned across the table, her own smile matching the syrup drawing. "Oh yes, but I think those blueberry eyes are definitely from your dad. Same color, see?" She glanced at Jack with a teasing warmth in her expression. Jack felt his cheeks flush slightly, but he didn't mind. These Sunday morning breakfasts had become their tradition over the past few weeks. The diner seemed brighter somehow, filled with an energy that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine outside. "Dad, remember when you used to make grumpy face pancakes?" Emily asked, stabbing a piece of her creation with her fork. "Now you make happy ones." Jack reached over and ruffled her hair. "That's because I have better assistant chefs now." His eyes met Maria's across the table, and the quiet understanding that passed between them made his heart feel full. Maria wore her manager's pin with pride, but it was her confidence that truly shone. The regulars had taken to calling her Miss Maria with genuine respect, and she'd turned the diner into a gathering place for the whole community. Even now, several customers waved as they passed their booth. "Oh, tell Maria about your science project," Jack prompted, watching Emily's face light up with excitement. Emily bounced in her seat. "We're doing an experiment with plants. And guess what? Mrs. Thompson said I could bring in some of the herbs from Maria's windowsill garden for show and tell." She turned to Maria with pleading eyes. "Can I? Pretty please?" "Of course, mi cielo," Maria said, using the endearment that had become natural over time. "The basil is growing beautifully. Maybe we can pot a small one just for your classroom?" Jack watched as Emily launched into an elaborate plan for her presentation, her hands gesturing wildly, nearly knocking over her orange juice. Maria steadied the glass without missing a beat, as natural as breathing. These small moments of casual care had become their new normal. A burst of laughter from the kitchen drew their attention. Through the service window, they could see the new cook, hired last week, showing one of the waitresses how to properly flip an omelet. The failed attempt sent egg flying, and everyone, including Maria, dissolved into laughter. "The place runs itself these days," Maria said with pride, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Remember how quiet it used to be?" Jack nodded, thinking back to those tense early days. "Hard to believe it's the same diner." He paused, watching Emily arrange her remaining fruit into patterns. "Hard to believe a lot of things have changed." The morning sun caught the silver cross at Maria's neck, a gift from her mother that she'd once kept hidden but now wore openly. Just like the Spanish phrases she used freely, or the traditional recipes she'd added to the menu, it was part of who she was. The town had learned to embrace it all. Emily finished the last of her pancakes and scooted closer to Maria's side of the booth. "Can we show Dad the new dessert you're making for the weekend special?" Maria's eyes sparkled. "You mean the tres leches cake?" "Well," she pretended to consider it carefully, "I suppose we could give him a preview taste." Jack raised his eyebrows. "On one condition. No more surprise ingredients like that spicy chocolate thing from last week." "Dad!" Emily protested. "That was amazing. Your face got all red and funny." "Exactly my point," Jack said, but he was grinning. Maria stood up, smoothing her apron. "Come on then, both of you. To the kitchen." She held out her hands to them, a gesture so familiar now it made Jack's throat tight with emotion. As they followed her through the Sunday morning bustle, Jack watched Emily skip ahead, chattering with the waitstaff who had become like extended family. The diner smelled of coffee and cinnamon, of fresh bread and possibility. The words home and family had taken on new meaning since that rainy night months ago. Near the kitchen door, Emily stopped to hug Maria, wrapping her arms around her waist. "Can we have Sunday breakfast here forever?" she asked, looking up with hopeful eyes. Maria smoothed Emily's hair, sharing a gentle look with Jack. "Forever is a very long time, mi cielo." "That's the point," Emily declared with the simple wisdom of children. Jack watched them, these two people who had brought light back into his world. The old Marine Corps flag still hung in his garage at home, but it no longer felt like a weight. Instead, it reminded him that courage came in many forms, including the courage to open your heart again. The sound of their laughter echoed in the warm diner air, mingling with the clinking of coffee cups and the murmur of conversation. It was the sound of healing, of hope, of home. Jack felt something settle in his chest, a peace he hadn't known in years. "We're finally home," he whispered to himself, watching Maria lead Emily toward the kitchen, their hands clasped together, their laughter trailing behind them like music. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Turner, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.